So again, I want to thank you all for just the opportunity to be sharing with you. For those of you who haven't been here before or are watching this on delay, I'm Melissa Smith and I'm with Caregiver Wellness Retreat. We're a nonprofit that's based here in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I have been running free in-person retreats for about 7 years. And then COVID threw a little bit of a wrench in our plans and we moved everything online. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm really grateful to be continuing to offer these kinds of things online and as a resource. And our main goal is prevention. So it's really to provide tools and resources so that we can stay ahead of the effects of the things that happen. So whether it's the effects of grief, stress, anxiety, overwhelm, all of these things that just happen because we're human. And so my hope is to continue to share these kinds of tools with everyone. And I started it actually out of a desire to be of service to my dad, who was a full-time caregiver to my stepmom, who had early onset Alzheimer's. And so she was actually here at Sierra Vista and Vista Living in Santa Fe. If you're familiar with their memory care, it's really quite beautiful. And also after he cared for her for so long, and it was quite a transition. So I can appreciate those of you that are in transition right now. There's a bit of, I think the way that my dad put it is, it was as if she had tiny deaths every day. So when you're working with someone who has Alzheimer's or dementia, there's these parts of them that either go away or just change completely. And so it's like, oh, who am I going to meet today? who will this person be? And also what I became aware of that I don't think my dad as a caregiver saw was there were changes in him. And what happens is sometimes it sort of goes under the table and you don't realize the cumulative effects of maybe not, you used to go for walks and maybe you don't anymore. And then you realize, oh, walks are really challenging all of a sudden, or just even general movement are challenging. Or maybe we get really indulgent in our eating patterns and different things. And then we realize, oh, I'm not feeling as great. And then we think about how the effects of sugar or the effects of this actually intertwine and have a huge ripple effect on our whole body. So we're just going to pause before we start and just take 3 breaths together. So my hope today as we explore this topic of grief is that it opens a door for you to be with what is, which is essentially what mindfulness is, being in the present moment with awareness, without a sense of like harsh judgment, just present with what is. And for me, it's been a way of moving through life so that I can be okay with okayness. I can be okay with some suffering that happens, and I can be okay with really great days too. And I can kind of just hold them all together. And that really is such a beautiful way to navigate life instead of allowing myself to be thrown or thrust by all of the various things that do tend to happen. So we'll just take a couple of breaths together. And my suggestion, as I always invite in mindfulness, is to take the eyes just a little bit off the computer. You can close them, you can take a down gaze, but just that way, there isn't just this constant stimulation. When our eyes are constantly looking out, right, it's a very active mind. When our eyes can rest a little bit back inside, it takes some of that stimulation away. I also make some big assumptions on accessibility, that we all have 2 legs, 2 arms, and that may not be the case. So if I cue something such as feet or arms, know that I am fully aware that we all have different abilities. And so I will also make the assumption that you'll do what's best for you in that. So if you can, both legs, both feet connect to the ground, and maybe notice what you're sitting on. So I'm just going to do a little wiggle side to side so I can actually feel the weight of my body on my chair. And my eyes either just off or low gaze, or I'm going to close them. And we'll just take 3 easy breaths together. So breathing in without forcing, just noticing the in-breath. And a gentle exhale, noticing perhaps the texture of the breath. And a soft inhalation, noticing the temperature as it enters the nose. And as you exhale, maybe noticing what you observe happening in your neck, your shoulders, and your jaw. And again, inhaling, easy, no forcing. And as you exhale, letting it ride to completion. So almost as if you were watching a waterfall go over the edge. And then go back to a normal breath. No need to modulate it, but imagine that breath sitting in a pool or an eddy at the edge of a waterfall. And there's just this gentle motion to it. It's easy. Your attention is just lightly there. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. So take a moment just to notice how that felt for you and how you feel after just taking a few breaths. Sometimes hitting that reset button in the nervous system can be really as quick as that, or even one breath. Anytime we can extend our expiration of breath longer than our inhale, we're telling the nervous system that it's okay to rest, to digest our food, and that we're generally safe in our environment. So that longer exhale really precipitates a sense of calming or relaxation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, maybe, if it's going to be cooperative for me today. All right, let's see. There we go. And one more click. Voila. Almost. Okay. There we go. So resiliency. Resilience is one of my favorite words because it is this act of responding to things that aren't always anticipated. So it is this option or opportunity for our body to respond, often autonomically, without, in other words, without a conscious effort, to the things that happen or are situational. And so resiliency is an opportunity for us to digest emotions, sensations, some physiological sensations, and incorporate and integrate those. All right, excuse me. I feel a little tickle in my throat, so just take a little sip there. So as we understand how grief and loss impact us and how that creates that sense of resiliency, our ability to respond with a sense of effervescence, if you will, or a sense of strength that we weren't even aware that we had. And it gives us the ability to move through, and it uses one of those key components for mindfulness, which is acceptance. Well, we just did a breathing exercise, but we're going to continuously tap into these exercises. And this particular breathing exercise is called WHO breathing, WHO, and it's one of my favorites. And so there's a couple of ways that actually we can do this. I actually just like to rest my hands at my side, but you could also lightly put your hands on the belly just so that you can feel the effects of the diaphragm. So it does a couple of things. Anytime we do a breathing exercise accompanied by something else, either a movement or a counting, it uses two different parts of the brain. So you're really less likely to start your grocery list or to be ruminating, which is what breathing exercises, which is a part of mindfulness, allows us to combat. So you can either just loosely place the hands on the belly or just to relax them if you like. And so this breath is right at the edge of the nose. You feel the in breath, and your out breath is as if you were saying the word WHO, who, or as if you were just blowing a candle out, but really softly, not like a birthday candle, like you're excited, but it's as if you would just wanted to flicker the flame. So it's an inhale through the nose. And again, eyes just a little off the screen, if you will, or closed. And exhale as if you were whispering the word who. And then you'll inhale again, breathing in through the nose. And exhaling as if you were whispering the word who. And you just let it go till its completion without forcing. Inhale again, breathing in through the nose, just feeling the softness of this pattern, that it's not forced. And exhaling, who. And again, breathing in and breathing out that soft who. You'll do a few more rounds on your own. So you might find that your tempo changes a little bit. Maybe it gets longer and longer. You might also become aware of these really soft pauses in between the in-breath and at the out-breath. If you had your hands on the belly, or you still have them, you might even begin to feel sort of this light pulling in of the lower belly. And that's your diaphragm at work. So your diaphragm is fully ascending and fully descending the longer you're able to create that breathing pattern. Take just one more of that pattern. So it's in through the nose, out through the mouth, as if you were saying the word who. And then just allow yourself to breathe a normal breath. So breathing in and breathing out. And as you just breathe in and breathe out, is the breath longer or shorter? Is the breath smoother, a little less textured? And what are the quality of your thoughts? Maybe even the quality of the tightness. Has tension dissipated between the eyebrows, the jaw, maybe even the chest or the shoulders? And last, what do you observe about the weight of your body? Is it more light, or does it feel a little more heavy? Neither are right or wrong. These are your experiences. And when you're ready, you can bring your eyes back to the screen. So feel free to add in the chat box what your experience was, or what you notice physiologically in the body. So that lightness, heaviness, coolness, warmth, space, all of these different things are sort of inner landscape experiences. And by taking just a moment or a beat to notice them afterward, make us much more likely to repeat that practice. So when we notice the positive effects or positive benefits, right, we set a little pattern in our body and our brain, and that neural pathway, right, just can get stronger and stronger the more that we notice its positive effects. Yeah, calm and serene. Thank you, Linda. I'll share my screen again. Breathing is one of my favorites. Now, we're moving toward the direction of grief and understanding the ramifications and different aspects. And I think today we're going to do a little bit of a grief timeline. If you have a piece of paper and a pen, then I'll encourage you to do just a little bit of writing You can also go back to this recording later if it feels like that is a more digestible time to do this exercise for you. At any time, you're in charge. You have the agency to pause, to get up and move around, to go do a breathing exercise instead of the exercise that we're doing. So just keep that in mind, that you have full agency for that. This is one of my favorite definitions of grief. Grief is love with nowhere to go. Another version of that is because we have loved, we grieve, right? So there's that, the beauty and that we glean from poetry and from writing about the depths of sorrow in order to feel joy. And so much of that is also in mindfulness principles, this sense of being able to feel and be exposed to opposites and hold them at the same time. Another definition is grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or a change in a familiar pattern of behavior. We often associate grief with simply the loss of someone or something, but grief actually can be quite broad. And that spectrum of loss in and of itself is a much larger bucket. It really can be anything in terms of a loss of a job, a change in a living situation, an empty nester, for example. It could also be in the form of a separation, whether a change in a job or a change in a relationship. All of these things, it is not simply the loss or the death of someone, but it could be, again, a change in our own behavior as well. There are so many myths in grief, and there's two in particular that I'd like to mention to you, and that is this concept that we believe that we have to go through each of the stages of grief, or that there is a particular timeline with those. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross actually wrote specifically on the stages of grief, and that's what she became so well known for. She has such a fascinating life story. She's no longer with us, and there was a sort of a resurgence of Ross's work at the latter part of her life, and her collaboration with David Kessler, who now is sort of also very well known in his books about grief. And what's sad about that and interesting is she had all of this complicated grief at the end of her own life. And as she looked back, there were many regrets and many, many other things. And yet she had had a friend or companion at her side as she was passing. And that gives me a lot of hope, but it also, for me, taking in the wisdom of those that have come before me and studying grief, and those that have come before me in the stages of life, of how important it is to not isolate ourselves, to remember that no matter what kind of grief or loss we're going through, what access do we have to be a companion for someone else, and for someone to be our companion as we're going through the end stage of life. And that, for me, is one of the biggest impacts, not her stages, but how she lived her own end of life. So she had these particular stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. However, she clearly stated in her book that they're not linear. And unfortunately, they were taken as linear. And so it's so important for us to realize that those are various experiences and emotions that can occur as a result of grief. But because we're all as unique as our own thumbprint, grief will happen uniquely for each one of us. We may never face or see a specific stage of grief. We may hover around anger for years, or we might hover, around this depth of sorrow for a long time. It's circular. So we can dip in, out, wave through. It can look like the most obscure graph that you can think of, or the most beautiful ocean that you could imagine. that's what grief can be for each one of us, and so different. And I think if we let go of that expectation, it can help temper our own reaction and responses to various emotions toward it. There was another sixth stage that David Kessler added on, and that is to find purpose or meaning. And for me, that is incredibly powerful, whether we sort of take that existentialism view of life or not. The science actually shows that when we find a sense of purpose, and that's going to look different for everyone. I know one of my sense of purposes is this call to service, to acts of service, and to be of service. That is a really big driving force in my life. So you might consider reflecting, it's a pretty deep one. What is your purpose? What brings you joy? What are those things that you sort of tease out and do every day? We are the sum of the things that we do, and it's really revealing if you were to look and reflect on just even the most benign week of your life. Where do you spend most of your time? And then where do you say that you derive your joy from? Do they match? And if they're incongruent, that's where you know you can grow. And if they're congruent, then you want to just create some exponential habits around those things that bring you joy. So I mentioned the timeline. And if you have that piece of paper, I'm just going to guide you through a couple of steps in creating, actually, before I share my screen, I'm going to show you my own. Okay, not to overwhelm, this is not what we're doing today. So, but I just want you to show you that I started this probably maybe about 4 years ago. And I started adding to it here and there, and I revisit it every once in a while. I keep it kind of tucked into my favorite journal. And then COVID is on the back with all the collective grief that we've gone through. But what's really beautiful, and I'll kind of go through some things, our focus and looking at the timeline is how do we honor it? How do we honor some of these things or ritualize these griefs or losses that we have? So I'll encourage you as I guide you through this to perhaps pick ones that are not particularly triggering for you, maybe that are a little, just feel a little softer for you today. And then you can continue to revisit, as I have, year over year, and it changes. And also new things come up for me as I'm experiencing life now. I might remember a memory from a long time ago, and then I realize, oh, that's really interesting. maybe that's why I experienced sadness on Easter. That's when my grandmother passed. And I hadn't really put those two together until a few years ago. I thought, holidays and seasons, I knew that, but why was this right around this period of time for me? But by being able to kind of put a little timeline to it, it made things a little bit clearer, a little more digestible for me. So our first column, so you can actually put several columns. So your first column is just to recall one loss, and I'll read a few out and you can kind of just begin to list however. They can be relationship, such as divorce, family. Could also, I even put my first marriage because it was a loss of independence for me. And it was a change and a complete move to a whole new city that I wasn't prepared to go to. And I lost my community and family, and I went to a whole new state where I knew no one. A loss of could also be church, faith, a loved one, could be an illness. Aging can be a loss. A physical ability, perhaps maybe there was something that was a part of your repertoire in your early days, and then later you're no longer able to do that. A loss of trust or love or connection, purpose. It could be an object. I'm still grieving one of my favorite coffee cups that fell off as I drove off, and I had put it on top of my car. I think about that coffee cup a lot. Maybe I need more therapy, but but I really do. So attached. I think of a pair of earrings my grandmother gave me, and they're gone. I don't know what happened to them. And they are lost simply because it reminded me of her. Maybe you have a business or in your job. I think of, as I've run a yoga business the last 20 years, and I've become so attached to my community, and someone unsubscribes that I've known forever. And I think, why? Come back. I miss you. It could be a pet, an animal. Moving is a loss, a change of location, a change of house, a change of neighborhood. Money, finances can be a loss. A change in your situation, time. Often we think about regrets, what we do with our time. I think about my older son who struggles and has relapsed several times, and the theft of time with him due to this illness. Your favorite socks, maybe a piece of clothing you cherished is missing. So you've probably listed quite a few. In the next column, you can just pick a couple, maybe one or two, and next to it, you'll write an emotion, what you're feeling today. You could add another column of maybe an emotion that you felt previous, if you like. But I'm most curious about what you're feeling today. So some of those feelings can be denial, anger, guilt, sadness, bargaining, depression, acceptance. Sometimes it's relief. Sometimes it can be both relief and guilt altogether. And if you've written one or two, you know that you can come back to this. So your third column will be a sensation in your body. So you might pick one that, again, that's a little less strong for you right now. Notice that emotion, and then you can even just close your eyes, or you can just pause, but notice where you feel that emotion in your body. Is it showing up for you somewhere? I did this exercise with this gentleman in a group setting, and he said he couldn't feel it anywhere. And as he was talking and sharing, suddenly he couldn't speak. And so he realized he felt it in his throat. He was trying not to cry, trying not to actually express that emotion. So sometimes we may not feel it at all. We might feel a sense of numbness. All of those are okay. and normal. So we'll pause there just for a moment and you can come back to your list. We're going to add a fourth column in just a little bit, but we'll do another little experiential, little bit of breathing together. So again, kind of feeling your feet on the ground, taking a soft exhalation, letting your shoulders sort of drip away from the ears. Maybe you add a little movement. We've been sitting for a little while, so if you need to kind of wiggle your shoulders around the back. So just kind of notice how that makes you feel. And then settle back in, feeling that exhale again. And so again, picking a loss that maybe isn't your strongest loss. Recalling that emotion. And noticing where it shows up in the body today. So where does it meet you today? So I'm noticing some weight or some heaviness across my shoulders. That's where I feel it today. And then take a moment, we'll create a little metaphor around the sensation that we feel. So my sensation is the weight on my shoulders. So I'm going to imagine a heavy boulder or brick on my shoulders. So feeling like I have the weight of the world on my shoulders, just as an example. Or maybe you feel as if you had a knot in your throat, or as if you had as if your chest were wound up like a top. Or maybe you feel your head is spinning. So a metaphor that makes sense for your sensation. Once you have that phrase, then begin to imagine what you would like to have happen. I'd like to take that boulder and knock it off and let it crash down to the ground. Or the knot that's in the throat, unwind it, unthread it. Or if there was spinning, I would imagine stillness or that top just lying down. So whatever your metaphor is, if you can begin to imagine, and if you cannot see it, if imagery doesn't work for you, you could also write it. However that works for you. You could also picture that in a form of a color. And now beginning to take just a few breaths here. Let the inhale be nice and smooth. You can use the who breath if you'd like to practice that again. So it's as if you were whispering the word who, blowing out through the mouth. And a gentle inhale. You can just do normal, natural in and out breath. And now go back to that sensation that you were experiencing. And does it feel the same or does it feel different? Because of the metaphorical action that you took. If it feels the same, then consider an actual movement. So I'm going to imagine actually taking off the boulder or unthreading. I might just touch my throat. Imagine placing the thread down. And then noticing how you feel after just taking that simple movement. And one more exhale, and when you're ready, you can open your eyes. I'm curious how that felt for you. You could unmute, or you could type it, or you could just do a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whatever works. I first learned that actually from when I lived in Malaysia years ago, and there was a wonderful woman who taught this particular type of meditation that she learned to use with refugees who were experiencing trauma, and moving away from that experience into the body, help them feel the discharge of what it is they were experiencing and the power of the mind that the mind has to change and shift something, even temporarily. So one of you felt release. Yeah. So I'm going to move back toward my screen here. So we didn't discuss the types of grief, and you probably can guess from your list that you wrote in your timeline that there are many, many kinds of losses, whether it's disenfranchised, which is also something they call unacknowledged or ambiguous. If you're familiar with someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's, that would be ambiguous. In other words, the person that you've lost is still living. They're still with you, but they're different. Their personality is different. I actually even heard Esther Perel describe ambiguous losses. This couple sitting side by side, texting other people, having no conversation or communication. They're there, they're in the same room, but they are not actually together. And there is this loss of relationship. I thought that was fascinating. Anticipatory. So if you're anticipating a loss in the future due to a terminal illness or an imminent maybe retirement or change of life, that's anticipatory. Collective is what we're experiencing with this between war and pandemic, all of these things, right? We're experiencing this collective loss and grief together. There's also cumulative losses, loss after loss. There's traumatic or complicated loss, which can be complex in terms of maybe some trauma in addition to the loss as well. There could be masked loss, and this in particular, I think of the gentleman who had a disassociation with sensations and feelings. So from the neck up, I'm fine, I'm great, I'm A-okay. And then from the neck down, right, his body was telling him something else, or could be telling you something completely different in terms of maybe your immune system being down, getting sick, or having various autoimmune things happen. Oftentimes, we tell ourselves one thing and our body tells us something completely different. So there are many kinds. So we're going to move to the last column here on your grief timeline, and that is, how can you honor or ritualize that grief? I think of a lovely way that my father honored my stepmother. We took some of her ashes and we scattered them where she had a beloved dog, and we put some there, and then he kept some, and he wasn't sure what to do with it, and he planted this beautiful tree, and so he put those at the base of the tree, and he waited and waited. So it was many years later, and I was so touched by that, because it was such a beautiful reminder. It's in your timing, not anyone else's. Closure and this honoring or this ritual is when the time is right for you, not when society or family or anyone else expects you to have this. But this ritualization, this sense of honoring, is something that's not, other than in funerals, isn't really customary in our culture. We tend to sort of bypass it. And I'll encourage you to be thinking of ways that you can express that in each one. So maybe just pick one for now. I have a particular loss, and what I do for it is I continuously buy fresh flowers. Thank God for, I wish Trader Joe's would pay me, but thank God for Trader Joe's flowers. They're so inexpensive, and it's my little indulgence, but it's also my honoring. It's something that is beautiful, that reminds me of that loss, and so that it is always there to spark joy, not always sorrow. So if you might think of something, another woman told me the other day she was going to take a trip and visit some friends, but after listening, she decided she would do a little detour and just stand at the ocean. And that was it. Just a little time at the ocean, because this person she was honoring loved the ocean. So if there is something that kind of comes to mind, or as you want to expand on it, and there's no timeline for it, of course, ironically, even though it's on a timeline. Yeah. It's a good question in the chat box, how to honor grief connected to trauma. And I think that's a beautiful question. I think that would be, it depends. And it depends on you. I can think of a particular friend who had a very traumatic experience. And the way that she honored her trauma was to get her real estate license. She was told that she could never do it. You know, she had a lot of negative feedback from family. Boy, guess what? She did. And she felt this sense of independence. And her trauma was related to dependence and this idea that she couldn't do things. And without exposing what her trauma was fairly significant. So I think it really depends on you, and as you navigate life, and as you hopefully have therapy or have a means to be able to process grief connected to trauma, that something will come to mind for you. Remember that it's not, when it's trauma, it's not about honoring the other person. It's about honoring you and your healing process. And I would say all of this is about you and your healing process. So, and no one needs to know. There isn't this, grief is so sacred. You don't have to announce it to the world. Here you go. Here's what we'll be doing to honor. It can really just be for you. I love that. She added to the chat box, self-compassion. Absolutely. Sometimes it's just being able to acknowledge a feeling or a sensation. Yeah. I'll move back toward my screen. Thank you for asking that. So mindfulness and grief for me are so intertwined, because it is a way, an accessible way to tap into these sensations and the experiences that we're having in this moment. Because grief is not linear and it changes day to day, the first step in being able to recognize when grief changes or when these emotion changes is simply paying attention. And I've given many definitions of mindfulness, but this is a really good one. It's awareness that arises through paying attention intentionally, on purpose, in the present moment, without judgment. And the non-judgment part, right? So be careful not to judge your judgment. It's this idea of equanimity, of being okay with what is in this moment, being okay that I'm angry, but mindfulness would interject and say, okay, now what to do with that experience of anger now that I'm aware of it? I'm going to feel it. Or maybe anxiety comes up. There's anxiousness. Can I be with it and allow that sensation to pass through me instead of trying to jump over it, ignore it, stamp it down, or drive it away? So acceptance is that active process. It's not passive, just like grief is not passive. It's not a passive resignation. It's an active recognition that things are the way that they are. We'll do a, thank you. I'll just read briefly what someone shared in the chat box. Sometimes I have no words for our way to access feelings. Art or touching colored pencils on paper to brush and canvas has helped a lot. It's not to share with others or execute the ability, but to express it. Yeah, beautiful. There are so many different ways to process grief. And I love that you had just mentioned art. And so we're going to just take a mindful looking exercise as a way to enjoy, express, or touch into what we observe in the present moment. So just letting your eyes just take in the flower. Breathing in and noticing. Breathing out. So you can take a wide angle view of it. Imagine taking in all of the flower all at once. Seeing multiple colors, maybe the design, the shapes. And then allow your eye to get a little closer and a little closer to each part. How does that change your experience to what you're looking at? What do you observe now that has changed? Or what feels the same? Is there a particular shape that stands out for you? Is there a part of it that maybe makes you smile a little bit? Maybe it makes you think of your own favorite flower. Take just a few more breaths and notice what you notice in your body as you look at this. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes. Feel free to share how that was for you. Has anyone done some mindful looking at art before? I know if you're with me before in the past, you have. You know, the average individual looks at a piece of art for 2 to 10 seconds. So I'll encourage you. I know someone shook their head. I agree. I would encourage you the next time you pass a work of art, even if you think it is shocking or not at all lovely, could you take a few more seconds than that to take it in? Ask yourself what you see, what you notice. I always get really curious about what the artist was trying to convey. And then most importantly, I think about, well, what do I think about this? What is my opinion on it? Is it moving? Or do I feel neutral about it? Anytime we can allow ourselves to take in that sense of beauty, that is exactly what grief needs us to do. To hold both beauty and sorrow. To be able to be where we are in our experiences and also be with the suffering that's greater. When we expand our resiliency and our capacity, imagine if everyone did that. I'll also encourage you, and I'll see if Jessica can send that out when she sends the recording. There's a beautiful classical song. And so oftentimes, I don't know how many of you use music to work with. Yeah, music is a big one for me. There is a very specific method in terms of music, rather than thinking that you need to put on a peppy song to feel peppy or to feel better. Instead, consider playing a song that meets you where you are. And then what you do is you move through. You'll listen to that. Maybe it's a sad song. And then what's maybe one more degree in the direction toward joy? So not necessarily another really, really sad or low song, but it might just be a little notch up from that. And then a little bit different, and then a little bit different. So if you've never made yourself a playlist like that, sort of moving in degrees, it's why, folks say, oh, I play that song 30 times and I have a good cry and then I'm all good. A song that sort of reminds you of a particular event or emotion in life, but you don't want to stay in the 30 songs. So your next song will be something that's maybe a little less so. And then the next one will be a little bit more rejuvenating. And then the next one. So kind of building upon that. So we'll end today with one more mindfulness technique. And this one is a holding. And it's one of my favorites. So again, it uses the assumption that you have access to your hands. And if that is not the case, you can always imagine. So we'll actually begin by taking both of our hands on the side of the head. You can take the eyes to a low gaze, close them, or just slightly off the screen. Notice the warmth between the hands, the container that this creates between both hands, holding the head. This container contains your thoughts. And then you'll move one hand to your forehead, and then one hand to the back of the head. It's that mothering hand, that hand that just says, it's okay. I'm here. Still containing thoughts that begin to form emotions. The hand that's on the back of the head will move to the heart, and the other hand will stay on the forehead. So forehead and heart, see if you can sense any sensations between these two spaces. I like to imagine there is this tethering of compassion between my thoughts and the space around my heart. The hand that is on the forehead moves to the belly. The hand that's on the heart stays. And as you breathe in, noticing the breath against the bottom hand. The belly is this place or seat of intuition. It's the place of knowing in the body. Scientifically, we know that the vagus nerve wanders through the base of our brain and innervates through all of our visceral organs to send information back to the brain. about what to do, whether we move quickly or whether we rest and digest. There is a knowing there. And then keeping the hand on the base of the belly, the other hand just gently cups the back of the head, just where I mentioned, sort of the brainstem there, right at the edge or ridge of the skull. That you can almost just lean back and be comforted, knowing that you've got yourself, that that hand catches you. And then last, you'll just relax both hands down and take another full expiration of breath. And when you're ready, you can bring your eyes back. Oh. Judith, thank you for asking that. She asked if I chose the sunflower for in honor of Ukraine. I did think about that as I pulled this up, but no, I have. I've done an art study on Mary Delaney, who actually did that artwork. She was the very first woman who created almost a decoupage. If you were to zoom in on that sunflower, you would see that she had delicately cut paper and put and pasted that on. And actually, it was the late 1800s. And she became so well known that actual botanists would buy her artwork to use as reference for their flowers. And so she was a remarkable woman, and also a woman who experienced a tremendous amount of grief in her life, and was all the more resilient because of it. So I'd like to say that I did, but actually it's Mary Delaney's story that I'm most interested in today for grief purposes there. But I'm glad that you mentioned that. Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Yeah. The Museum of Fine Arts in Houston has a program called Looking Together. I'm familiar with that. We've worked with the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston. They have another small division of their museum where they run programs for caregivers and partner with Amazing Place. You may know about that. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. We're just a few minutes over, and I'll ask Jessica, you can stop the recording, and I'll thank everyone who watched us online. And I'll stay just another minute if anyone else has any questions or anything they would like to share